My name is Ransom. Yes, that's my real name, and no, I haven't been ransomed, but man, do I love that joke. Anyway, that's my name, and somewhat recently I experienced something that I cannot explain, nor do I ever wish to repeat, for so many reasons. I grew up in southern Alabama, but moved away for school, and then later moved to the East Coast for further education. I now live in Philadelphia with my wife, but back when I lived in a little town where I grew up, my dad and my Uncle Barry used to hike from time to time. My dad had this old cabin up in the foothills that we'd trek out to for a day and just sort of hang out. Occasionally, both my parents and I would go out there in the cooler months and spend a weekend. It was a neat little spot, and I remember it very fondly. I've been back home from time to time since I moved out, and every time I came home, Dad and I would go out to the cabin. Barry, who actually lives in Texas, couldn't always come with, but when he could, it was awesome because we'd always have the best talks. I remember taking the machete my dad gave me and cutting back all the tall grass whenever we went up there. Just a lot of really good memories. Mostly. You see, when we go up there as a family and stay the night, my parents would get the one bedroom, and I had to stay out in the common area by myself and sleep on the couch. I was fine with it because I'm small and the couch was really comfortable. But at night, that cabin would get pretty creepy. The night sounds alone were enough to freak anyone out, but I eventually got used to the occasional mockingbird or owl. What I didn't get used to was the semi-regular visitor we'd get in the middle of the night. At least 4 times that I can remember, what I originally thought was just a person would come up right next to the window behind the couch where I slept. It would come right up to the window, stand there and breathe. I remember looking up at that window and seeing this dark shape there, and just going totally still. I'd lay there, terrified, listening to this thing for what felt like hours. Then it would leave without incident. Now, the first time it happened, I dismissed it without incident, but when it came back a month later, I made a point of telling my dad about it in the morning. And now my dad was a big joker. He loved messing with people and would take any opportunity to poke light-hearted fun at anyone. But he didn't. He kind of got angry, like seething angry, and asked me a bunch of questions. How big was it? What did it look like? Did I ever try to move? And if I did it react? It was like he was trying to confirm something. That night, whether Dad stayed up, set an alarm, or just preternaturally knew that it was close to 3 a.m., he got up, came out into the living room, and waited. Our family is from Texas, so we have plenty of guns, but my dad was holding the .357 Magnum revolver, which was a known quantity I'm not fooling about thing for him to have done. It told me that he took it seriously at least, and moreover he believed me, which I thought he would not. The thing never showed up that night, and nothing really happened, but Dad told me that if I ever saw it again, I was to come over to the bedroom and wake him up. That was also the year that my dad showed me how to use a shotgun, and where it was at both of our houses, and at the cabin. I've never ever seen this as a coincidence. Now, a couple of months later in early spring, we stayed at the cabin for just a night, because we'd gone to another town for a picnic for my dad's work, and the cabin was much closer than home. And that night, I woke up to the silhouette there at the window, but it had already started to leave as I started to wake up. I went and woke up my dad, and he came out with a flashlight and his revolver ready to go. Dad had me stay inside with the shotgun and the door locked to keep Mom safe while he went outside and looked around. He was out there for a while, and I heard him go all the way around the cabin, but when he made it to the door and I unlocked it for him, he just shrugged. He said he'd heard something moving off in the trees way back, but never saw anything. We went home the next day and didn't really say much about it. This creature, whatever it actually is, didn't visit the cabin for like 2 years after that, and we didn't have anything like a disturbance in all that time. Then one year we vacationed in Texas to see family and spent a good chunk of the winter holiday season there as well, so we hadn't visited the cabin at all. Then later in the following May, we decided to go back to the cabin for a weekend, after not visiting the place for almost a year. Again, the days were wonderful and fun. We made salsa, cooked some tasty burgers, and sat outside with some iced tea at sunset. Even the first night was uneventful, and the couch was still as comfy as I remembered, but on that second night, it came back. I remember hearing the breathing and opening my eyes, knowing that it was there. The black shape just loomed at the window, creating a silhouette on the blinds, as it had both times before. That was the night that I realized, whatever this thing was, it was huge, as its head reached the top of the window pane, which was easily 8 feet off of the ground. Its breathing also seemed somehow more intense, like it was really angry or maybe excited that we'd come back after being gone for so long. I remember leaning a little over to the window and trying to peek behind the blind, but when I did, the heavy breathing got even stronger, like it was new that I was trying to see it, and didn't like that at all. All that I managed to spot was some dark-colored lace going down a slender arm, which confused the hell out of me. I shook it off, and remembered what my dad had told me to do, and so I eased off the sofa and crept toward the door to the bedroom where he and my mom were sleeping. I wasn't more than 3 feet from the sofa when I heard a voice call out from the window. It asked me in a strangely deep, distorted but feminine voice, "Can I have a hug?" Needless to say, I was absolutely terrified, and I just locked up and froze for the second time encountering this thing. I didn't move, I tried not to breathe, and I certainly didn't answer. After a moment, the thing started to whimper, like it was sad that I said nothing. I heard the sound receding from the window, and only after I couldn't hear it anymore, I turned around to see that it was gone. Now, I didn't bother waking up my dad, but I did grab the shotgun, and I sat in a chair that was backed by a wall on the other side of the cabin. I sat in that chair for the rest of the night, with the shotgun on the floor next to me. My parents found me in the morning and asked me what was going on. I told them all of it, and I was pretty shocked when they seemed unsurprised. My dad scolded me for not waking him, but told me that what I had done was smart. He made me a promise that if I ever saw anything like that again, I needed to come and get him immediately. And that's when my mom, who'd been utterly silent about this whole thing, told me something that just blew my mind. It was Huggin' Molly is what it was. My mother had told me when I mentioned what the thing had said. She went on to explain the legend of Huggin' Molly, which I'd never heard of before. She's a ghost or a cryptid or something from a town east of where we lived, and she apparently runs up and hugs children while screaming in their ears. She apparently squeezes them to death, which was also pretty terrifying. I was totally shocked when I heard this, because not only did I never expect either of my parents to believe such a story, but I'd also never expected them to know of it. We were a church-going family and somewhat hopelessly normal. Well, they were. I went along with it. Anyway, I would just never have expected anything like this from them, but they were both pretty casual about it, if concerned. Now, when I asked them why they never mentioned any of this to me before, my mom's response was blunt and to the point. She told me that I'd always been good. I didn't try to go out late, especially not without permission, and I didn't run around town doing any kind of foolishness. She laughed at the face I gave her in response and told me that Huggin' Molly was a spook for kids who didn't behave. And then she told me she wasn't actually sure if it was Hugging Molly, but that asking for a hug made her think of it. We pretty much packed everything up then and skedaddled out of there within the hour. I was moving particularly fast, which my dad appreciated. We went out to Wendy's for lunch after church that day, and my dad had made a point of joking around and making faces to make me feel better. We never went back up to the cabin after that, which was kind of a bummer, but I'm still glad we didn't all the same. Now, many years had passed and I moved out to go to school. First at State University, and then I moved out to Baltimore to go to Peabody. I spent a lot of years there, and then I met my wife and settled down. We, of course, went down so my wife could meet my folks, and have had plenty of trips there since. But we never went to the cabin. Well, we hadn't. That was until very recently. Many years after I'd left, and after both of my parents had passed and left all their belongings to me, I found myself going through my dad's stuff at the house that I grew up at. I found the Magnum that he'd had that night he'd stayed up to wait for Huggin' Molly, if that's what it was. The gun reminded me of the cabin, and I suddenly realized that I'd quite forgotten about it. The cabin technically belonged to me now, but I wasn't sure I wanted it. It wasn't just the experiences either. I was definitely selling the house because I didn't want to be a landlord and I couldn't afford to keep it otherwise. Mine and my wife's life was in Philly, and I just wouldn't be down there enough. Anyone who's gone through dealing with an estate will know, dealing with a house can be a huge hassle. The cabin might be doubly so, since I likely have a harder time selling it. And I realized that no one had been up there in probably years, and I had no idea the state of the place. It might have been a total wash, a reason that I had to go check it out, both to see what kind of shape it was in, and to gather up any personal belongings my parents might have left up there. It was January when I was down there, so it was getting darker earlier, and circumstances dictated that I was finally heading out to the cabin on the last day of my trip, right at sunset. Trust and believe that I took my dad's Magnum out there when I went, and without hesitation. The drive was longer than I remembered, and when I got to the place, it was almost dark. I really wish that I'd been able to come the next day, but I had to head back early the next morning, and I didn't know when I'd be down in Alabama again. I decided just to get through it, and just checked on the outside first while I still had daylight. Aside from a branch that fell from the nearby trees and damaged the porch awning a little, nothing really looked worse for wear. Even the rockers on the porch looked to be in good shape. And then I went inside and I found the place pretty much as I'd seen it last. The bed was made, the furniture was where it was supposed to be, and everything seemed intact and in the way I remembered it. There were some dead bugs that had gotten in, and evidence of other vermin, but nothing that couldn't be easily cleaned up and dealt with. I spent an hour going through the cabin, clearing up and pulling anything that wasn't furniture into the main room. I wanted to consolidate everything, and hopefully have just one box of keepsakes, and one box for donation. And by the time I was finished, it was proper dark outside, and I went out to load up my car. As I stepped out of the cabin, I was hit by an unusual chill in the air. If you've never been that far south, it generally doesn't get colder than about 60 degrees on an average winter night, even in January. But this air felt like it was in the middle of the night in the dead of winter in Philadelphia. I remember shivering heavily when I stepped outside. As I stepped off the porch with my box of keepsakes, I heard a strange noise coming from the back of the cabin. It sounded like something moving through the underbrush, and I gritted my teeth because I neither wanted to deal with a wild animal or anything else. I opened the truck and got the box into it, then spun around to see what might be there. But there was nothing. I shrugged and just went back into the cabin to retrieve the other box of keepsakes. My plan hadn't come to pass, and I had 2 boxes of stuff to keep and 5 to donate. As I came and placed the second box of things I wanted to keep into my car, I heard a familiar whimpering behind me that made the hairs on the back of my neck go up. I drew my dad's Magnum and turned around and pointed it towards the side of the cabin, but there was still nothing there. I marched into the house, the Magnum in my hand, and grabbed Dad's old flashlight from one of the donation boxes. As luck would have it, it still worked, and I circled off the porch and around the side of the cabin. When I shined my light that way and into the trees that surrounded the place, there was nothing, but I could still hear whimpering. I had to be careful because while I know what I expected, I might have been utterly wrong, and I didn't want to accidentally shoot someone who might be looking for help. But the trouble was, all the memories of seeing that thing at the window rushed into the foreground and screamed at me that whatever was making those noises wasn't something that I wanted to encounter. Despite my trepidation, I continued around the side of the cabin, to the back, where the property ended abruptly in deep, dense woods. I scanned the tree line to see what had made the noise, but I didn't spot anything at all, and the whimpering had stopped. I stood there for a good long moment, but saw and heard absolutely nothing. Angrily, I turned back to the front of the house, and when I got there, I just pushed the rest of the boxes into the closet and closed it. I'd just have someone else donate the rest of what was left, or just say it came with the cabin at this point. I just didn't care anymore. After everything was tidied up, I grabbed the trash bag I'd filled and went outside to lock the front door and to get the hell out of there. I didn't know if hugging Molly was real, and I didn't really want to find out. As I got to the back of the car and tossed the trash bag in, I heard the whimpering again, and this time, it was decidedly closer. I shut the trunk lid casually, despite my mounting apprehension, and used my key fob to make sure the car was unlocked. I wasn't planning on even looking back, but just getting into my car and leaving. Unfortunately, I spotted something dark slip back around the side of the cabin, out of the corner of my eye. I knew then, and I now know, that I should have just done what I'd planned to. You see, I should have just gotten into my car, driven to my parents' house, and forgotten all about the cabin. But my curiosity got the better of me, though, and I found myself moving cautiously back over to the side of the cabin that I'd seen the movement at. I told myself that I wanted to make sure and chase off any animals, or people who might get inside and wreck the place, because I didn't want to have to worry about fixing anything. The truth, however, is that despite my attestations, I was morbidly curious. The flash of the black lace I'd seen so many years before haunted me, and I wanted to know who wore it. I regret giving in to this want, and I will for the rest of my life, I think. As I rounded the side of the cabin, I saw her standing there, closer to 8 feet tall than to 7. She was a pale-skinned, gangly-armed woman dressed in black from head to toe. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and was bent over, looking into the same window she had when she watched me sleep as a child. When the light from Dad's flashlight hit her, she turned toward me, and her face was distorted in a manner that I can only describe as deformed. The woman's skin was porcelain white, as though she'd not seen the sun in years, and her lips were gray-blue, and looked like that of a corpse. Her nose was huge, hawkish, and crooked, and her teeth were yellowed, as if long stained with blood. All of that was bad enough, but what really got me were her eyes. They were large, bloodshot, had no color, only pupils, and they stared at me with a mania that seemed to border on rage. "Oh, I've missed you," she screeched as she reached out to me. "Come closer, give me a hug." The last word came out in a violent, deafening scream that seemed to last forever. I fired my dad's revolver, and much to my shame as a Southerner, I don't know if I hit anything at all, but I know that I fired 3 times. I stumbled backwards away from this monster from some dark abyss, my instinct to survive finally overriding my idiotic curiosity. I heard another screech, and then heavy thumps as she stomped over to me, and I wasted no time in getting my feet under me. I darted for the car, and when I got to the trunk, I stopped and used it to steady my aim, firing one single well-placed shot at her center of mass. She screeched again, but it still only staggered her. I know that I hit her this time, but a .357 Magnum round only staggered whatever the hell this was. I wasted no time and jumped into my car, turned it on, and sped off. I thought it was over then, but I was dead wrong. When I looked in my rear view, she was following me down the gravel road that led to the cabin, and she was gaining on me, screaming, "Hug me," the entire time. All I could see was her black clothing and her huge white hands snatching branches away and throwing them at the car. They clunked off the trunk and the roof. One hit hard and spiderwebbed the back windshield as I was blasting out onto the back road. I pulled a sharp screeching turn when I hit asphalt and turned to see her giant insane eyes staring at me through the passenger window. She roared at me again and tried to hold on to the car as I peeled out of there. She gave chase, but on a paved road, I could go much faster, and soon she disappeared into the darkness behind me. I sped up probably 90 and didn't stop until I hit the commercial lights of the downtown of my hometown, which I will never see in quite the same way again. I stopped at my parents' house only long enough to grab my luggage, throw up, and lock up. I wasn't going to stay there that night. No, sir. I drove for 4 hours until I got to the hotel I'd planned on staying at the next night, and I checked in there. I don't think I slept much that night at all. I definitely didn't turn the lights off. I drove the rest of the way home, knowing in my heart that I would never ever return to that town, which, while final, kinda made me sad. I mean, I guess I really can't ever go home again. The whole drive home, I went over what happened 100 times, and all I kept thinking about was how glad I was that I'd come out to Alabama alone that time, and that my wife was home in Philly, safe. The other thing that I couldn't get out of my mind, and that still keeps me up at night to this day, is that hugging Molly, or whatever the hell that thing was, had been out there, lurking outside of my window every single time. She'd been in those woods since I was a child, since my parents were children, and she's probably still out there today.